Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. Just by way of introduction to the series of discussions we're having this week as part of Mishcon Impact Week, at Mishcon we're committed to having a material positive impact on society, on the environment, and operating as a socially responsible business. By way of reminder, our impact aims are to increase access to law, to create opportunity, to increase diversity in the legal profession, and to make sustainability a reality. So throughout this week of 4th of October, we're showcasing several key impact initiatives and providing opportunities for everyone to learn about the ways in which we can contribute. So today's event is part of that programme, and it focuses on an issue that centres around the aim of creating opportunity. So by way of introduction, earlier this year, the Centre for Education and Youth, in collaboration with King's College London, released a research report which aimed to explore the barriers to higher education access faced by young people who have insecure immigration status. The report is the first to examine the barriers that stand in the way of young people who have refugee status, are seeking asylum, have limited leave to remain, or have indefinite leave to remain, and are undocumented. So during this panel session, the experts who commissioned the report will be looked at the scale of the issue. We'll be talking about the impact of being blocked and the action that needs to be taken in order to ensure that young people are given the support that they need. So we're very fortunate today to be joined by 3 panelists. First of all, we've got 2 young people who've been directly impacted by the issues which are the subject of the report. So thank you very much to Samuel and Milana for joining us today and agreeing to share some of their personal experiences. We're also very fortunate to be joined by one of the authors of the report, Vanessa from the Centre of Education and Youth. So in terms of the structure of today, I'm in a moment going to hand over to Vanessa, who will be able to summarise the report far more succinctly than me. And then I'm going to invite each of Samuel and Milana to share some of their experiences with us, and then we'll progress on to a more general discussion. So Vanessa, first of all, welcome. Could I ask you to talk about what the objectives of the research were and what the key findings were, please?
So thank you, first of all, Samantha, and thank you everyone for having me today. I'm really excited to speak about this research. I think it's something that's quite important. And as you'll hear from the young people that are going to speak today, it's something that impacts a lot of young people in very negative ways. So the research is called Higher Education on Hold. It was commissioned, as Samantha said, by King's College London and written by myself and my colleague Ellie at the Centre for Education and Youth. If you don't mind, I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug about who the Centre for Education and Youth is before we start. So the Centre for Education and Youth is a think and action tank that provides research, support and tools for young people, for practitioners and policymakers working with young people. I will go straight into some of the main findings of the report. So in terms of the key questions that we were trying to ask, when we were looking at what we wanted to research, we actually convened a steering group of experts and asked them, what do they think are the key questions that need to be asked in this area? So the main topic that we wanted to find out about is, what is the impact of insecure immigration status on young people's access to higher education? And we broke that up into 4 questions. So the main questions we looked at were, which groups of young people face barriers in accessing higher education as a result of their immigration status? We then also wanted to look at, so to what extent are young people with insecure immigration status, apologies, it's a bit of a tongue twister, underrepresented in higher education? And in terms of the barriers that they face, what are these barriers? And finally, what support can these young people have in order to make their journey to higher education more smooth? So as Samantha mentioned before, some of the groups that we looked at are young people who are currently undocumented, have limited leave to remain, have indefinite leave to remain, are seeking asylum, and also have refugee status or humanitarian protection. There has been research previously that's looked at the barriers that these young people face. However, the research tends to look at one group at a time. So for example, a lot of the literature looks at the impact on young people with refugee status and asylum status. Whereas in this research, what we wanted to do was look at the group as a totality and look at the barriers that they face. So the first question we wanted to answer was, to what extent are these young people underrepresented in higher education? And unfortunately, it is quite a difficult question to answer definitively. There is quite a lack of data, and that's for a number of reasons. The first being these young people are refused entry to higher education at different points. So for example, some young people might find out that their status means that they're not eligible for student finance, so they don't apply at all. Or when they're going to apply, that's when they find out that their status has an impact on their access to higher education and they don't continue. Or some get into university and it's at that point they find out that they don't have access to student finance. So as you can see, they tend to find out at different phases. So it's quite difficult to maintain data. There's also issues in universities around GDPR and making sure that this data, if they do keep it, is compliant with the rules and regulations that they need to comply with. But we do know that globally, 37% of young people go to university compared to just 3% of the refugee population. And at the same time, we also know that thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of young people in the UK have insecure immigration status. And you'll also see in a second that they also face significant barriers, which means that we can deduce that there is a significant amount of young people being barred from access to higher education, despite not knowing what exactly that number is. So in terms of the barriers that these young people face, what we found, first of all, is that uncertainty is a theme that goes across all barriers. As lawyers, I'm sure you guys know that immigration law is very complex and difficult to understand, and dealing with the Home Office can be quite troublesome in the sense that it's very long application processes, it's expensive, and for statuses such as limited to leave to remain, you have to renew it every 2.5 years, so it's something that's an ongoing process. This means that unfortunately there's a constant feeling of uncertainty that these young people face, and this is also a feeling that underpins other barriers. So for example, poverty can be exacerbated by immigration status. Also mental health can also be exacerbated by a young person's immigration status. In reference to refugees specifically, one of the pieces of literature we read coined the term super disadvantage to talk about the ways in which you have the legal and systematic barriers, which also kind of exacerbate and make the other barriers worse, such as what I mentioned before, such as poverty and mental health. So in the report, we see, we look at legal and systematic barriers, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second. We also find that these young people often suffer from higher levels of poverty, which often is linked to conditions placed on their immigration status and that of their parents. We also found that some young people in this group have issues in terms of language proficiency and qualifications. It tends to be more so the case that their qualifications aren't recognized rather than it being a language barrier, it's worth saying. As said before, poor mental health, and there's also issues within widening participation practice in the sense that a lot of these groups aren't necessarily tackled when it comes to scholarships, for example. A lot of the scholarships we found specifically target refugees and asylum seekers, but don't target young people with limited leave to remain, for example, who also don't have access to student finance and may be barred from higher education. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about the legal and systematic barriers. I feel quite ironic talking to lawyers about the law, but here we go. I'm going to give it a shot. So what we found in the research was that obtaining and maintaining status is very difficult. As you can see in the table, we've kind of broken down what the different statuses mean for young people's access to student finance. But as you can see, gaining legal status doesn't automatically ensure that a young person has access to higher education. Sorry, I say higher education, what I'm talking about specifically is access to student finance. So there's a distinction between home status and international status. And as you can see in the table here, young people that have refugee status and humanitarian protection are seen as home students, therefore they have access to student finance. But young people that are asylum seeking, that have asylum seeking status don't. And only some young people with limited leave to remain have access to student finance, which means that a lot of them don't end up accessing it. What also happens as well is a lot of young people don't know what their status is until they start to apply for university, which can become a barrier in itself. So for example, they go to apply for university, they then find out that they need to gain legal status, which let's say, for example, it takes a year. Let's say it takes a year. After that, they still need to have their status for 3 years before they're able to access student finance, which again creates another barrier to access to student finance. Apologies. So I'm going to talk to you guys quickly about Mary, which is one of the young people that we spoke to as part of our research. The reason why I'm talking about Mary, by the way, it's worth saying we have changed Mary's name. Her name is something else. We changed it just to keep her identity anonymous. So the reason why I'm talking about Mary is because she kind of exemplifies a lot of the barriers that we're talking about in the report. So Mary came to the UK from Nigeria when she was 9 years old, and she came with her sister and her parents. Shortly after coming to the UK, her and her family were evicted from their home while she was at school at the time. So in the quote, Mary talks about what it was like at that time. Apologies, I would read it out to you, but I've got part of my screen blocking the quote, so I can't read it out to you, but I'll give everyone a moment to read it. So this is a quote from Mary talking about what it was like when she was evicted and how awful it was, and talking about kind of the impact it had on her ability to focus on school, and also it had an impact on her wanting to be at school at all. So despite this, Mary actually finished her GCSEs in the end, and she'd done very well in her A-levels, and she was really excited to go to university, but unfortunately she wasn't able to. She didn't have legal status at the time, and unfortunately her parents had spent their money legalizing her sister's status just previously, so they weren't able to do hers as well. In this next quote, she talks about what it was like to not be able to access university. So as you can see, she talks about coming to the UK and thinking, yes, I can finally go to university, feeling excited about the prospect of her education, and was met with barrier after barrier after barrier, which, as you can imagine, was very frustrating, which is what she described in this quote. I'll give you another couple of seconds to read that. So the last thing we looked at in the report is what support and policy changes are needed to broaden these young people's access to higher education and ensure that they're all managing to get to university. So some of the young people that we spoke to, we asked, what policy change would you like to see? And these were some of the answers that they came up with. As you can see, the top one talks about the impact of the hostile environment, imploring the government to look at the impact it has, particularly on young people. And the second two they speak directly about wanting to have access to student finance and wanting to be able to go to university just like every other young person in the UK. So in terms of the main policy change that we're advocating, we're calling for young people to be given access to student finance immediately once they have lawful status. So for example, the minute that they have limited leave to remain, they should be able to access student finance, the same with asylum seeking status as well. And we also call on universities and organizations with power to call, sorry, my screen is hidden, it's giving me a bit of trouble. We also call on universities to press for this change as well, because we think that universities have a lot of power and influence. And we think that this is something that's quite important and will broaden access for young people with insecure immigration status. In the report, we also have some specific recommendations for student finance, which I'll just go over briefly because they won't be quite as relevant to everyone that will be listening. But we call on student finance to ensure that their advisors have at least a decent understanding of what immigration rules mean for young people's access to student finance. Because one of the other things we found was that young people were getting conflicting advice, meaning that they were getting one piece of advice from one person being told maybe they are able to access student finance, and then another person telling them no. And they should also create a clear, concise guidance on what documentation is required in order to prove their legal status. We also have some recommendations from university in terms of admissions, again, making sure that admission staff have an understanding of what immigration status means for young people's access to student finance and scholarships. And they should also make sure that scholarships are broad enough to cover all young people that don't have access to student finance. And we also call on them to provide ongoing support. And then in terms of schools and colleges, similarly, we found that there was a lack of knowledge about insecure immigration status and what that means for access to higher education. So we called on schools, sixth forms and colleges, particularly in areas with higher levels of young people with insecure immigration status, to make sure that at least one member of staff has a basic understanding of immigration status and what that means for student finance. I will leave that there. If you wanted to find out more about the report is published on our website, which is on the board. I will stop sharing now and I guess pass on to Samuel or Milana, or pass back on to Samantha to speak to the young people. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's really interesting. It's clearly a really important piece of research that addresses an area where there wasn't data previously. Just before we move on to Samuel and Milana, we've got quite a mixed audience here. So some of us, as you say, are lawyers. Some of us are even immigration lawyers. There are quite a lot of non-lawyers as well. And there'll also be quite a lot of people who aren't familiar with the current student finance regime, as it were. I wondered if you could just really briefly talk about how accessing student finance would normally work if you're eligible and you didn't face any of these issues, and also what that means in terms of unlocking resources and access to higher education, please.
Yeah, so in terms of normal access to student finance, so for example, myself, who has a British passport, I would be classified as a home student, which means that I have access to home fees, which at most universities is roughly 9K. And I'd also have eligibility to student finance, which covers most of, if not all of my tuition fees. In the case of young people, for example, that have limited leave to remain, but don't also have status for enough time. So for some young people, if they have status for 3 years, they're able to also have home status, but the majority don't fall under that category. So in that case, they'd be classed as an international student, facing fees up to 30,000, and they also don't have access to student finance. Which means that, of course, £30,000 is a lot of money to be able to access. So even for young people who did want to try to raise those fees themselves, it's something that's quite unattainable, and unfortunately bars a lot of these young people from access to student finance, access to university.
Thanks for explaining that, Vanessa. It's clearly a huge discrepancy between what's available to someone like you and me as a British passport holder to others, and that real difference in tuition fees as well. So that's really helpful to illustrate. Samuel, I'm going to turn to you first, just because you're first on my screen. Would you be able to explain a little bit to us about your personal experience of some of the issues that are touched upon in this report, and anything in particular that you'd like to draw to everybody's attention?
Hi, thank you, Samantha, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to your colleagues. Hi, everyone. My name is Samuel Rami Akimwale. I am 21 years old. I'm a politics student at King's College London, which is how I developed a relationship with the Centre for Youth and Education. I hope I got that right. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on from there. In regards to my experience with this issue, it's slightly, I guess, it's a bit odd. I was fortunate enough to not be surprised when I was hit with this experience. My elder brother was one of those young people that applied for university and then was, older brother, sorry, and was considered an international student, no access to student finance, and then began the issues. My dad worked quite hard to try and get his first year done, and paid for that. God knows how. I guess parents just work really hard for their children's education, and then came the challenge of the second year, and so on and so forth. And it goes on, and it's quite complicated. But at that point, I realized that okay, this is going to be a similar issue to what I was going to face. In regards to myself, I arrived in the UK 2011, so it's been 10 years since I've been in the UK. I came here under Tier 1 visa alongside my mother and my siblings. At that time, the Tier 1 visa was around, I guess, design skills, as she was a computer scientist. Unfortunately, later down the line, a family member passed away, and it meant that you were 4 years into our residency in the UK, and at your 5th year, at that point, you would have you'll have received the indefinite leave to remain status. But this all threw the family into disarray, and the subsequent year, we received a letter saying, "Oh, you've got to leave," which is kind of odd, considering this is where we've had to bury a family member and so on and so forth. And it just seems particularly cruel. There's something just odd about, someone passing away and you exploiting that as an opportunity to evict an individual, considering everything was, I guess, going quite similarly well prior to that. At this point, we saw, I guess, more of the true nature of the Home Office experience that, I've heard tales about prior to that. then began the legal battles from judicial reviews to appealing decisions. And around 2018, we managed to, I guess, rise above the tides, and the judge ruled, like, I accepted our appeal and so on and so forth. But I think the critical period is between 2015 and 2018, where there's this gigantic gap in which we had no status. We were not illegal in our residency of the UK because we had ongoing application. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I presume quite a few of you are immigration lawyers, but there was no direct, there were no attempts to evict us because of the ongoing case. And obviously that could be said, but I'm still scared. I was a little charismatic, like, year 11 student. I was around 15, 16 at the time, and I would get home quite like frightened that, in front of the door would be some sort of immigration van, like, who's taking my dad and my sibling, and was going to take me as well. I'll get deported to a country that I'd left quite young, when I was quite young, and I don't particularly have any strong ties there at that point anymore. And so, yeah, it was an interesting experience. Fortunately, we're able to come out at the end of that, but this is where the interesting aspect comes into play. Due to the immigration law, it meant that the rule states that essentially we need to have ordinary residency for 3 years consecutively. It's odd because you meet individuals who suit the criteria yet fail to get access to tuition fee, student finance or support, and are still considered an international student. So it's quite weird, but I guess for me, it was quite clear. I knew that, this was going to be what happened to me. I'd seen it before. And so I finished my college experience. Great. I'm a bit naive. I don't know why, but I genuinely believe someone would call me and be like, oh, I'm going to fund your whole university experience. I don't know why. I was a dreamer, and I hope I still am. But that didn't happen. So I took a year out, which is an amazing year. I hate to sound quite positive out of a very unfair experience, but I think it was really fun. I tried to make the most of it. In that year, I applied for sanctuary scholarships. I had heard about a fantastic organization called We Belong, which I'll hopefully tell you a bit more about shortly. And they helped me and supported me in applying for scholarships. I applied for scholarships in quite a few universities. And it's weird because you apply to universities and then you sort of have to firm your offer, like which university are you going to go to, but you don't have the results of your scholarship applications also. That's a bit of an odd time, but I was quite fortunate. I received it. You would not believe the joy that befelt, like, that came onto me. It was just magical. Like, oh my gosh, I actually can go to school to study. Yeah, it didn't even matter that I was initially going to study medicine. Now I studying politics, but it didn't matter that, like, I can't fund there wasn't a scholarship at the time funding the 6-year degree, but at least I got to learn, and with politics, maybe I can at some point try to tackle this to some issue. But I guess you are in a slightly better position to do that as well, and I appreciate the support that comes from that. And yeah, so here I am today, King's College London student, trying his best to survive his degree, do a dissertation, all of that kind of stuff, and contribute to, I guess, supporting other young people who are going to go through the same challenges as myself, who have gone through the same challenges as myself, and I guess, came out but not all right, or people who've just lost their ambitions, their goals, because they continuously applied for scholarships and weren't able to get them, and are still ineligible for student finance because of the rules are still a bit odd. But there's that. I think the 3 things I would like to highlight, just because I feel like I've been going on for quite a while, are just a lot of, it might be above 3, apologies. The main issues that a lot of young people who've gone through this issue complain about is around I guess, a lack of information and understanding of the system. The immigration system is very complicated, as been said before. You may not believe that, but it's definitely been very convoluted for myself. And it doesn't need to be. As simple as it doesn't need to be, but I unfortunately believe that it's a deliberate effort to sort of, like, I guess, rip the souls out of migrants and just make it a more difficult experience to immigrate or settle in the UK. I guess that's the government policy, but it's a shame. It doesn't need to be that. And I guess, like, migrants, sorry to bring in politics into it, but there's a net positive contribution, just factually. The reports show that. The second thing is very bad legal advice at times, or, you know, very odd legal advice. So there's been cases I've heard of in which lawyers didn't necessarily, obviously not your firm, but because you guys are amazing, but in which people have just had a very, very dodgy legal advice and have ended up spending thousands of pounds. I'm not sure if you know about the costs, but we'll go into that later. And it's failed, it's messed up their whole life. They have to, you know, appeal, reapply, so on and so forth, or just, you know, leave a bit peaked. The final thing is, why is it so expensive? I already pay, you know, or my parents pay taxes. I pay taxes when I earn enough, which is never, because I'm still a student. But you know, I pay my national insurance, and I still have to pay the IHS surcharge, the immigration health surcharge, and that contributes to the additional fees of, you know, reapplying for, you know, my renew my immigration expense. And I don't know if you'd believe this or not, but like, the report shows that it's around the 83% of the cost is a profit. It's for the Home Office, which I don't know how many of you really listen to this, but I don't think Apple brings on returns like that. And they're tycoon. So the Home Office is clearly the biggest, you know, business out here doing the most. But I hope, you know, somewhere within you, it sits weird that they're profiting of migrants to this extent. It's quite wild. It's all right for it to be able to pay for itself and be sustainable, but there's a certain profit margin that just makes it very morally questionable. And so I just want you to think about this. If you're lawyers, how you can support other young people or just migrants in general who are facing this horrendous situation. If you're not a lawyer and you just feel compelled to do something, the organizations like We Belong, who will do some amazing work, I don't know, find a way to support them. Or just, if you see a young person that, you know, might be facing this similar issue, I don't know, direct them to the Center of Youth and Education, and hopefully they'll be able to, you know, guide them to the right path. But thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to you all. Milana, or Samantha. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Samuel, for sharing that personal experience. It's really powerful, and it's certainly very inspiring to hear how positive you're being, how constructive. And I hope you are still something of a dreamer, that they haven't sort of beaten it out of you, as it were. So yeah, I mean, you've touched upon some really important issues there, which I'd like to come back to the extent time allows, including the financial aspect. I know that's something as a firm we're acutely aware of. So one of our immigration partners, Maria, and her team successfully acted pro bono in challenging certain immigration fees fairly recently. And I know we've spoken with you, Samuel, and just kind of for the benefit of our audience as well, about how we can continue to support efforts to tackle a lot of these issues beyond today. This is really just an opportunity to raise awareness and hopefully, as you say, Samuel, get other people as well engaged, interested in this, so we can amplify the message, sort of bounce off each other and provide that support. And you mentioned We Belong there, which is a great organisation, essentially, as I understand it, fighting for young migrants to be treated fairly. I'm sure that they would put it more eloquently like that. But yeah, it's another great organisation to raise the awareness of. As I say, I'd like to come back to explore some of those themes a little bit further. But before we do, I'd like to turn to Milana, who's been waiting very patiently for her turn. Milana, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to share some of your experience and your thoughts on some of the key challenges and the issues that we've already discussed, or anything further that you think would be really important to raise, please?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thank you, Samantha. So my name is Milana, and right now, well, I'm 20 years old, and like right now, I'm volunteering for a few organizations like We Belong and On Road Media, where like I as a migrant, like trying to change the way migrants are portrayed in the media. And also Oxfam. So like I try to keep myself busy like with volunteering and like making a positive impact or like change, and like trying to find other things to do, like do something in the media, like trying to practicing photography or trying to like work on my own YouTube channel, because like right now I'm not in university yet, and so like these 2 years I've been kind of like really free and like trying to like keep myself busy. So I came to UK when I was 11 years old, and right now I do not have a status. So like my mom, she's a refugee asylum seeker, and before I used to be like a dependent on her case. So but now because like I'm over 18, like I have to apply for asylum on my own. So I'm currently working on that. Um, so I think in the report that the Centre for Education and Youth wrote with King's College London, they look at how insecure immigration status prevents people from accessing student finance, and this was the case for me. So when I finished my A levels, I've like applied to university, to University of Manchester, because like I live in Manchester, so and that's the university I wanted to go to and study psychology. So like that was my secure plan from actually a long time ago. Like I think since I was 10 years old, I had like a really big interest in psychology and like helping other people. So like I had this like strong plan in my head and like a dream, and so yeah, like I wanted to go to study psychology, and I've secured my place, and everything was going well. Um, like throughout my second year of sixth form, I was like kind of already understanding that I wouldn't be able to apply for student finance. Like it wasn't really clear to me, like like Vanessa mentioned in the report, like it's not really, a lot of young people are not aware of this situation. Like, and I'm glad like Samuel didn't really, like he kind of knew. So, but like a lot of other young people like me, they really don't know. So like when I was going to University of Manchester Open Day, I went to like financial department, and they gave like leaflets, and like there was a section for a scholarship for asylum seekers. So like when I saw that, I was like, oh, so maybe that kind of hinted me that asylum seekers and other immigrants, like they kind of go through separate system, like in terms of applying to like student finance and like getting finance support for studying. But then still at that time I was like, oh well, I'll still be able to apply for student finance, and I was like going with that, like with other young people. But then when I was like reading more about it, like the student finance, like how they like write in the description, yeah, it came to me like I there was no way I could apply. But at that point, like luckily, at least I knew that the scholarship for asylum seekers in University of Manchester, that like that was my only hope. And at that point, I wasn't like really aware of other universities like that they're doing other scholarships as well. Although like they're really competitive, but still it kind of increased my chances. But because like I know that it's my fault that it was like lack of research like that I didn't do. But because like in my college nobody really told me or anything like that, so I was like, and it was like really hard for me because like second year of college, it was really stressful because like I was I put on too much pressure on myself because also like apart from my studying, I did like music, and I was doing like a lot of stuff. So in terms of like preparing for exams and things like that, like I just couldn't like get myself that time to even think about like all this stuff with immigration and yeah, like applying for other scholarships. So it was like really stressful and chaotic. So I applied for the scholarship at University of Manchester, and I went to the interview, like, and everything went well, but like not in that sense that it would really it was like a strong interview that would get me that scholarship. So yeah, and like after that, like I've got my place at university, and all my results were well, and like I already could have gone to University of Manchester, but because I didn't get the scholarship, like the student, like the financial thing wasn't there. So at the end of it, because like I was really stressed about my results and like the place at university, but actually at the end of it all, it didn't matter as much as that finance part, because I was actually had the chance to go to sorry, I had the chance to go to like university at that time, but because I didn't get the scholarship and because of that I had to take a gap year. And at that time, it was really, it was really shocking to me. Like Samuel said, I still kept that hope, I don't know, unrealistic dream of I'll be able to find a way to go to university during that summer break, but there was no way I could find anything, because nobody could finance my study or anything, and because I'm an international student as well, the fees were really high, so no way I could have really done that. So I had to take a gap year, it was really stressful. I'll try to keep myself okay, stay positive that everything's gonna be fine, but it was really kind of knocked me down. Vanessa, you've mentioned in your report, a lot of young migrants already, they're kind of super disadvantaged because in terms of maybe poverty, in terms of because me, I can't work, or even volunteering sometimes because I have lack of documentation. For example, there was this time I wanted to work volunteer for this organization who work with children, because I'm interested in psychology, and I wanted to get that kind of experience, but because I had lack of documentation, I couldn't get my DBS check done. So even in terms of that, I was really facing another barrier. So and in terms of that, building up and also finding out that I can't really study at university, it's just it was really shocking, and it was a really hard time for me. And now I'm it's my second year without uni, so this time I'll start to apply for university again, because this 2-year break that I took, I had a lot of mental struggles as well. So right now I'm undergoing therapy, and Vanessa also in her report, she mentioned that without even knowing about this whole student finance and inability to go to university, also young people like me, I didn't know about my status and what's going on, because my mom, she was experiencing mental problems herself, so not a lot of things were done on our asylum claim. And only at the point when I was going to university, I started to realize actually I don't even have a status, and that's my biggest prevention from getting the scholarship, because I don't even have prove that I'm an asylum seeker, or something is going on with my case. So that was something I needed to work on, and that's something I'm doing right now. I'm working with my lawyer and trying to get a status, or at least start my claim. Yeah, so that will give me a chance to show, when I will go to get the scholarship from the university, the interview, I'll show oh yeah, my case is going on, I'm working towards getting a status, so in order to get the scholarship or support. So and hopefully this time it will be better, and I'll apply to different kind of scholarships, and hopefully next year I'll be able to study psychology like I wanted to.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think these personal accounts are so powerful. I think both of you are very brave and generous to share them with us. But also that it really illustrates what the experience is like and the impact it can have on young people. For both of you, it really strikes me your tenacity and your positivity. But also, as you've touched upon, Milana, I can't imagine the huge impact it has on mental health and the challenges that young people face, on top of, as you say, everything else at that age and at that stage of your education, exams, worrying about getting into university, what you want to do, all that sort of thing as well. I'm really pleased to hear that you are getting some support in that respect. One of the things that I was interested to know a bit more about is whether that side of things, the mental health challenges, are something that are recognised, if you're aware of any resources, whether it's peer-to-peer or from higher education institutions, for example, that you've come across. And then I'd be interested to then throw it back to Vanessa as to whether there's anything that's come up in research as to how we're doing as a society in providing that level of support and what we might be able to do better. So perhaps Milana, since you were last to speak, have you got any thoughts on that? And feel free, if you don't want to share anything in particular, do feel free to pass over to Samuel, who can then pass it back to Vanessa.
I'm not really sure in terms of mental health, especially like, during COVID times. I was reading some news like from the University of Manchester, because I'm kind of interested in that university, and because like right now I think a lot of young people like that just went to university with COVID, like the mental health aspect was really like struggling. So it was like, I think, I don't know, like a lot of young people were complaining about like how university was dealing with their kind of mental struggles, and like the things that they were not happy about. And I think just in general, even like talking about young people like migrants like us, I guess even just in general, students were not getting that kind of mental health support, like even in terms of COVID times. So, and I've not seen like much about like receiving that mental health support, but I see that like especially I've recently visited University of Manchester, like scholarship page, and I've seen that there was some changes made to that kind of like description, because before like it was kind of like just, oh, you will receive that, you'll receive that, but this time it was like there was a point about young people will receive like someone like additional help, like kind of mentorship, um, in order to ensure that young migrants receive opportunities, and like as also all the opportunities that other students are getting, so they're not like isolated in that sense, because that was another problem. So I guess like, because that's one of the things that We Belong, we were doing some trainings for universities. That's something that we addressed, that sometimes young migrants don't get the same opportunities that other students are getting. So in that sense, I've seen that kind of like positive change, but not every university does that. So, but yeah, I think in terms of mental health aspect, a lot of universities are still not there, like in terms of like giving that support. Well, that's what I think. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Milana. Samuel, is there anything you'd like to add? I mean, obviously, when you shared your account with us, you talked about the uncertainty being, as I understand it, quite a key characteristic of that time before you knew that you could go to KCL, you had your support, and that you'd be reading politics. Did you find that there was any support available, whether it was from KCL or other institutions or We Belong, or that I suppose people out there who kind of got it and were familiar with these challenges? Because you talked about your older brother having gone through a similar experience. Was there anything that you thought was helpful or could be more helpful in terms of, I suppose, being understood?
Thanks for that question. I think, firstly, it's very important to highlight that general youth mental health provisions are not where they should be. There's a massive waiting list for the CAMS, if that's what it's called. Yeah, it's quite wild. I'm from Manchester as well, proud Mancunian. So in regards to Milana, I definitely, I don't know, I feel like there's a connection there. But 42nd Street is an organization in Manchester that tries to support young people with mental health. However, in college, I'm not too sure I think, just to take a step back, this isn't an issue that a lot of young people want to speak about. If you're going through this, you're not telling your friends, you're not telling anyone. If you're bold enough to ask for support from school, which some people are, great. But this, I think it's a big assumption for people to make that this young people will reach out for help. And it's sort of hard to help in that situation, because how else would you know someone needs help unless they ask, I guess, be super observant. But that's the first problem. It's a very stigmatized issue. Immigration, quite contentious, from even the experience during the whole Brexit situation was interesting. But yeah, so people reaching out for help is probably an even bigger problem than the support being there, first of all. Then in regards to the support being there, I think my university does have general support for students, but I don't think it's stuff I need. I think some students who felt sanctuary scholars who are, I guess, in a similar situation or would be encompassed by that insecure status description, they have access to that support as well. But then again, I think the primary issue from my perspective is speaking about an issue like this to your friends, to people in general, just because it's quite stigmatized. But I would like to believe that King's and anyway, my college, they did try to like provide as much mental health support as they could. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, did you want to add to it?
I was just going to pass on to Vanessa.
Oh yeah, no, I was also about to pass on to Vanessa. I suppose just to draw out some of the themes that you had there, talking about the stigma, and for very valid reasons, young people may be reluctant to ask for help or perhaps even know that they can. And obviously, we hope that events like this will help raise awareness. And Vanessa, I'm interested to know, as I said before, what your take is on what support is available, but also whether there needs to be an outreach element, taking into account what Samuel said, that people don't have to actively go looking. I mean, how does that work? Where does the responsibility fall, do you think?
So in terms of whether or not they kind of have access to this support, so from what I understand from speaking to experts, there tends to be support in universities specifically in terms of counselling, therapy, etc. But a lot of these young people maybe don't even know it exists, so they aren't accessing it, or as Samuel said, they maybe don't even feel like they're at that stage where they want to talk about their mental health. I think there's also kind of, I don't want to say a lack of specialism, but when we're talking about these young people, often the fact that they have mental health issues is linked to very real things that are going on in their lives. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, while mental health is a symptom, I don't know if mental health support will necessarily solve the issue, because it's not, for example, something like anxiety or depression, it's you're having a reaction to how difficult your circumstances are. So I think the support that they do need needs to kind of go beyond mental health. One of the things that some of the young people were talking about was kind of a lack of access to, for example, hardship funds, not having the right documentation, or feeling as though they kind of have to pour their whole life onto this piece of paper in order to get money, or having to prove that they're destitute. And I think I would kind of put maybe more emphasis on, for example, ensuring that there's hardship funds, ensuring that students do know that there are these facilities available, and maybe to some degree ensuring that some counsellors have some sort of cultural competency when it comes to these issues, because I think the issues are maybe slightly different, or more, I don't want to say more complex, I'd say more slightly different to, for example, having anxiety or depression. So I think that's kind of maybe where some of the issue lies. And I unfortunately forgot the second part of your question.
I was wondering whether you thought there therefore needs to be some outreach, engagement, where the responsibilities, but I think you've sort of covered that already as part of your answer.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there needs to be outreach. I think, as Samuel mentioned, it's quite stigmatized. And I think when people aren't speaking about it and the impact of immigration on young people, it creates an atmosphere in which young people don't feel secure to talk about these things. So I think more needs to be done in terms of outreach. And as kind of Milana alluded to, more universities need to make sure that they're openly trying to ensure that they're open towards young people with insecure immigration status, making sure their scholarships are accessible, making sure it's targeting the right groups, and that these young people have access to the right information. So yeah, I'd absolutely say there needs to be more on the outreach side of things, definitely.
Thanks for that, Vanessa. I mean, as you've said there, and the report's very clear that there needs to be more and better financial provision. And one of the things that has come out that we've touched upon is the complexity of this area of law, even for those who, I say fortunate in a relative term, but fortunate in the way that Samuel was to at least see it coming because they have an older sibling. And then Milana, as you say, you became aware of it at a later stage. So obviously access to information is very key. So in that respect, Milana, I think you mentioned that you volunteer with We Belong. Is that right? In which case, would you like to talk a little bit about what they do?
Yeah, so like We Belong is a charity that became an organization. So like it's really nice to see it growing. So they like help young migrants like with different statuses to help them with just like making gathering like in order to be in order to come together, you know, like because usually like young people are really young migrants are really isolated with everything that's going on, and they feel like me, before I became aware of We Belong, I felt like I'm the only person who's going through this, and they're like why am I going through this? But like We Belong, it kind of like allows us to gather together and like learn about our different stories, and yeah, like, and we campaign together, do different things like organize some events and things like that, like in order to campaign and make better changes, like in immigration system and like how young migrants are treated. So yeah, it's a really helpful organization, and they help with like applying to universities, like, you know, Samuel said, like they help with applying to scholarships and like writing personal statements. So they help with different kind of stuff. So yeah, they do an amazing job. Yeah.
That sounds like an incredible resource there. And Samuel, I know that you're very enthusiastic as well about the work that We Belong does, as is Vanessa. But is there anything that you'd like to add in terms of the work they do, or anything that you'd like to highlight as to how people might support them?
It's sort of hard to ask that, to say that without, I guess, being within the organization.
Sure.
I do know that they're trying to grow. So they're trying to, again, out officer within Manchester. So they're based in London. I think probably from my perspective, there are like three main things that I think are, or should I say four, that I think really makes them what they are. They're inspired by, they're an organization of young people who've gone through the same challenges, essentially. Beginning, I guess, with the case that sort of threw young people into disarray around 2012. I mean, not a case, but a change in law. Immigration Act. I can't remember the name of the specific policy, unfortunately. And they came together then, and over the years, they've sort of pushed along in big, small wins here and there, with, you know, increasing the amount of sanctuary scholarships out there, and, you know, creating spaces for these young people to meet. As I said earlier, it's very difficult for young people in this situation to, I guess, share their experiences or speak to each other. And oddly enough, today is one of the days of they do a small monthly gathering of young people they work with, and I'm going later today, so I'll make sure to say hi for you. The third thing was, I guess, you know, helping young people understand their status, and I think that's something that everyone could contribute to, especially if you work within a law firm. I would hope that you're able to support some degree, because a lot of these young people don't actually know. It's weird because I don't want to blame parents, but, you know, who wants to tell their child that, you know, I can't renew your visa because of, I have to, you know, prioritize your younger sibling. It puts family in a very odd situation, and is the sooner the young person knows, the better it is, so they can, I guess, pull their resources as well. It sounds weird, but, you know, young people could do stuff too. Like, I know I definitely, like, I carried out that letter and every single document for like 3-4 years straight everywhere I went, because everywhere I went, I just wanted to ask for help. So I don't know, if you know anyone that's going through something like this, tell them to tell the children, be honest. And the final thing is policy change. And I think this is the most critical thing, because, you know, having conversations about what you're facing is one thing, and it's definitely going to help with your mental health. But this is a consistent challenge. When you're asking me to turn over 10K for my family in every 2.5 years, and, you know, with migrants, that comes with a set of barriers that, you know, restricts, I guess, your employability and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's an unpragmatic ask. It's quite unpractical, and so this is just something that kids have to do, like young people have to do this themselves. So the sooner, I don't know what political leverage the organization has that you work within, but if there's anything that can be done to advocate for change, please do it. If there's anything that can be done to change the rhetoric, the narrative, please do it. Actually, something I'm working on myself is gathering a collection of stories into an anthology and trying to publish it as a book with policy change ideas. I'll co-creating that with organizations within the sector. But anything that gets the conversation going, that's what I'll say. It's just a little call to action. And I'm sorry I've gone on this little monologue towards the end. So, well, thank you so much for your time.
No, not at all. It was really helpful. You articulated some really important and clear calls to action, as you say. It's really helpful because, as you say, it's very complex, whether we're looking at the family dynamic, the unique position that young people face with uncertainty and the different challenges, the financial challenges that were very clear need to be addressed, and the complexity in the law. So it's helpful to have your thoughts on the key takeaways there. I feel like it's a little bit unfair at this stage to ask Milana if there's anything she'd like to add, because I think Samuel's done a great job in covering it, but I want to give you that opportunity, Milana. Don't worry if there isn't anything. Is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
No, yeah, just generally, I think I want to add, yeah, like raising awareness, like in schools, and just like, yeah, that's something I would want to see, like in colleges especially, because there was a time, yeah, like when, I was applying for a scholarship and I was asking my head of hall to, like, write a reference for me, and at that stage I was the one explaining about like my situation, like the scholarship, and she was like really interested to know. So yeah, like it would be really helpful, like if at least, like, yeah, like Vanessa said, at least one person in college, at least one could know about how like immigration works, like that young people are going through this. So yeah, I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the two of you being here today together with Vanessa is, really key. The fact that you're spending time like this, helping to start those conversations and to raise awareness. So as I say, we really appreciate you both being here. Vanessa, any final sort of closing remarks that you'd like to make? I feel like Samuel and Milana have done an excellent job covering everything. So I don't know if there's anything left for you to say.
I mean, it's pretty hard to follow them, but I just wanted to say, all of the young people we worked with throughout the research, and obviously Samuel and Milana as well, they're all so ambitious, so resourceful, so intelligent, and it's such a shame that they're barred from education or face so many different barriers. So I guess I would just like to end by saying that young people should be able to access student finance as soon as they have legal status, and it will at least remove some of the barriers, if not very many of them, which I think these young people don't need to face, and they shouldn't face. And I will leave it at that. Thank you so much for having us today.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's really helpful. And as I say, we're really hopeful that this is just the start of the discussion and the engagement we have on this issue. So I'd just like to close by a few acknowledgements and thank yous. So first of all, a huge thank you to Vanessa and the team at the Centre for Education and Youth. I know you've been working very hard with Marianne and the rest of the Academy team to put this event together to help us identify and articulate what some of the key issues are. So we're really grateful for that. And if anybody missed the link to the report, we'd be very happy to share that again. Please do get in touch with the Academy team. And of course, a huge thank you to Samuel and Milana. As I say, I think having individuals articulating their personal journeys is incredibly powerful. It's really engaging, and we very much appreciate you giving up your time to share that with us. Finally, I just want to thank our audience, our virtual audience. Those of you who are clients and contacts, you can find more about our impact programme by visiting our website, mishcon.com. And for our internal audience members, you can find out how you can support our impact programme by visiting the impact page on the internet or by contacting a member of the impact team. As I say, we're really keen to continue the engagement and take things forward. So please do get in touch. And other than that, just to thank you again to all of our panelists, and hope to continue the discussion with you on another day.